Most of us say we would do anything for Christ. I've heard people say, if Jesus tells me it's what he wants me to do, I'll walk on coals for him. Well, let me tell you one thing he wants us to do. He wants us to sacrifice for one another. It's part of that love your enemies, love your neighbors kind of thing. And so one of the things we don't tend to think about when we say sacrifice, especially for our neighbor or our enemies, is for our spouse. So let me start with this. The word sacrifice comes from the Latin word sacra, which means holy, and ficia, which means to make. So to sacrifice is to make you holy. And if you've listened to my other videos, you realize to be holy means to be set apart. So we're really trying to walk this walk and set ourselves apart from what? From culture, from the rest of the people. We want to be set apart as a people very particular for God, right? It's in the Bible everywhere. So the best way to do this is in our relationships. And for those of you that are watching that are married or even divorced or want to get married or you breathe, you should learn that, what we have to do to sacrifice is to do it for others. So we can often sacrifice for those we love. You sacrifice for your kids, you sacrifice for your parents. You've got parents in the hospital or in the nursing home, and you give up your time to go sit with them when you'd rather be doing so many other things like cleaning your house or getting your bills done or things that you need to do. But it's a pretty big sacrifice for your mom and your dad when they're dying. I've had so many of my clients that talk to me about that. And God bless you, because your parents sacrificed for you and now it's your turn. In our selfish society, we tend to say, well, I can't handle them anymore. And I'm not saying there aren't some of you that can't handle it. That's not what I'm saying. Sometimes they need to go someplace where someone else needs to take care of them. Don't send me texts and saying that I said that you're bad for doing that. But what I am saying is for those of us that are trying, even when your parents are in a nursing home and you're there daily trying to visit them, that's a fantastic sacrifice. So again, when we sacrifice for others, we're making ourselves holy. So the Bible is filled with saying, love your enemies. And so many of us say, okay, yeah, I can love my enemy. And you instantly think of like a Muslim terrorist. Well, I can love him. I can forgive him. Well, come on. That's easy to do because you've never met them, and forgiving them, and for the most part, is theoretical. You don't really have to do anything to love them because you've never met them. But it's really harder when you're talking about sacrificing for a spouse that hurts you, even when you're happily married and you just rather get up and go do your own thing. But to think that you have to stop and maybe make a cup of coffee for your spouse, or maybe iron his or her pants, or just picking up, or various things. But what I really say the sacrifice comes is when we sacrifice our enemy. And when our enemy is our spouse, that person who treats you like garbage, the person who's just a jerk. Maybe he's trying to divorce you. Maybe she's already divorced you. Maybe they're with the other woman or the other man. Now there's an enemy to sacrifice for. So when I talk to my standards, when I talk to my clients, I talk about how can you sacrifice for that person who's hurt you most, your spouse. He's sitting there taking trips with the other woman, and all you want to do is punch him in the face, theoretically, right? How do you love that person? Making yourself holy, sacrificing for that person is a whole different level. What are some of the things that you can do? Maybe the kids haven't seen him or her in a while, and it would hurt you if they spent one of your days with your spouse, their other parent, because it was his fault for leaving, or it was her fault. And maybe you just know that your ex, as the world calls it, though you're never ex, you're always married until death. Maybe they maybe they're going on a fishing trip and they'd like to have your son with them. Or you find out that you're the spouse that, I know a man who his wife had left him, and he found out that she was sick with strep throat, and he drove over. He went to her favorite restaurant, and he drove and got some soup, and he dropped it off for her. She had no idea who was coming, and he just handed it to her and said, I hope you feel better. It was her favorite soup from her favorite restaurant. I'm thinking she probably ate it, but we won't know, right? That was a sacrifice, because he had to sacrifice his time, he had to sacrifice his money, he had to sacrifice his pride for her. But see, that was a step in holiness direction. What are some of the things you can sacrifice? Let's think about those of you that have your spouse still in the house. And some of our spouses can just sometimes be jerks. I can be a jerk. I don't like to be, but there are days where I have to go to confession. I tell the Lord, I've just been a jerk to my husband. So sacrificing is sometimes, I've just been behind this computer all day, all week, which I am literally all day, all week. And then my husband at the end of his workday wants to sit down and watch a movie. And sometimes I just want to get the heck out of the house. But I know that he's tired. And so I'll sacrifice that. And I'll sit with him. And I don't stew. I sometimes do, but I'm not supposed to. But loving your enemy, sacrificing for them is just sacrifice my needs for your needs. What are some of the ways that you could sacrifice for those around you? I'd really like you to focus on the ones you want to get extra points in heaven, right? And there are levels in heaven. Bible talks about it. If you want to really, really please God, and you go and love that person who's hurt you most, wow. I'm going to be doing a video on the different love styles soon. And there, once we get to agape, we'll talk about really loving our enemy. But for now, let's just focus on sacrifice. May not be what you want to do. May actually be the opposite of what you want to do, because I always sacrifice for her. I always sacrifice for him. What do they ever do for me? Well, I'll tell you, the less they do for you, the better the reward for you in heaven. It is not easy, but as I'm growing and maturing, I have recognized that's specifically what Jesus wants. He wants us to be so spiritually mature, so we can totally understand. Look at the sacrifice he made. Maybe think about him sitting on the cross. He knew everything. He could see everything. And he's on the cross, seeing you commit adultery, seeing you rob your employer, seeing you sex traffic, seeing you be a glutton, be an alcoholic, seeing you hate. And he's still sacrificing for you. He's giving you his blood. That didn't feel good. Apart from the fact that Jesus knew he was opening the gates of heaven for those of us who wished to enter and did what we needed to do to prove to him we loved him. It's open. The gates are open when Jesus died. We don't all just get to march in. We have to love him in return. He did say there are going to be some of us that are going to say, Lord, Lord, and he's going to say, I don't know you. So don't get under this misguided idea that everybody gets to heaven because God opened the gates. I, for one, want to show God that I love him so much. And I'm trying to figure out the things I can sacrifice for him. And I suck at this, guys. Of course, I live with my husband. It's the one I need to try to sacrifice for more. And that's why most of my couples are opposites. Introverts married to extroverts, thinkers married to feelers. People who prefer action are married to people who prefer to sit still. I did that on purpose because he wants us to sacrifice something of ourselves for the other person, because that makes us more like Christ. Give it all. And because I am human, I do know what it's like to think, I just wish they'd give me something in return. I know. Whenever you can, just shake those thoughts, get back up, sacrifice something else. Sacrifice that vacation you wanted, sacrifice that money you put aside for that extra something you were going to buy. Sacrifice your time. You really just worked hard all weekend and you just want to go home and rest, and you see your neighbor's spouse just was put into the hospital, your elderly neighbor. Or you Wisconsinites, you go sacrifice your time to shovel someone's driveway or mow their lawn because you know they just can't. And don't tell anyone. You get even extra points. God sees all. And in sacrifice, he's just trying to make us more like him. So if I'd like to ask if you could please pray for me as you're doing this. I do these videos, and then every time I turn it off, I go, I just failed at that. My poor husband has to live with me. I really need to be a nicer person. So if you could pray for God giving me the grace to sacrifice more, I'd really appreciate it. And I will always be praying for you. So I hope this helps. It's your informational bacon bit for the day. I'm Dr. Christine Bacon, and I want to remind you always to live your life sunny side up.